Centuries of human evolution, 2 world wars, Labubu. Humanity went through such a long path only to be ridiculously crushed by these red things in Hollow Knight Silksong. Silksong is not a game, it's a cultural happening. It's a small indie project that managed to take down Steam, PS Store, Microsoft Store and eShop servers at the same time. People around the world literally could not buy video games for several hours because of the hype around that project. But Silksong became this phenomenon long before its release. Usually, a game is announced, developed for some time and sold around spring or fall. Usually, but not in the case of Silksong. Silksong was supposed to be an expansion for Hollow Knight, which was financed back in the times of the Kickstarter campaign for the original game. However, with time, the plans of Team Cherry changed, and the DLC was remade into a full-blown sequel. Developers showed the trailer, and after that, it seems like they turned off the internet for the next 6 years. I beat Hollow Knight only last year, so it wasn't the game that opened Metroidvanias for me. But nevertheless, it became that for many other players, becoming one of their most favorite video games, naturally creating a community around this sad world of cute little bugs. In this story, I'm more like a visitor of the zoo, who in real time observed how people on the Silksong subreddit went insane with every following day without Silksong news. The so-called Silksanity each year progressed, eventually separating this cozy subreddit into some completely distant dimension, with its own absurd humor and local memes. My favorite Silk post is this dude who found in his local sex offender database people that look like developers of Team Cherry, while they do not look like them at all. There was even a whole hour-long presentation dedicated to Silk posting. As Dan from Folding Ideas said, Silk posting was about baiting other people into having hope, so each time a new game presentation was announced, people waiting for Silksong let the whole gaming community know about their suffering, which lasted for half a decade and finally ended September the 4th, when Silksong officially released. And to think of it, one of the most anticipated video games of this decade was developed by the game director of The Last Airbender tie-in game for Wii. I am not kidding. I am glad that anticipation for Silksong became a meme, not just because it took 6 years for an Australian team of like 3 or 5 people to make it, but because during all that time, people weren't just waiting, they were waiting for an amazing game. Its high quality in the end reignited the fire of discussion around the project, which launched for just $19.99. Before the release, many speculated about the game price, since after so many years of development, Team Cherry surely had to ask at least $40 for their next game, considering quality level and cultural impact of their previous title. Hollow Knight's cult following consists not only of players, but of developers as well. Team Cherry's work gave life to a whole subgenre of hardcore Metroidvanias. I like to call them Hollow-likes, games with cutely drawn main characters, which work on the contrast with high difficulty, inspired by From Software games. But in the end, Silksong, like the original Hollow Knight, costs the same $20, which raised discussion among indie developers, who fear that now players will use Silksong as some sort of benchmark for all games for that price. Which in turn flashed me back for 2 years, when the same discussion rose around Baldur's Gate 3, when some developers on Twitter were afraid of Larian's RPG due to its setting standards too high for its price tag. As back then, as today, people are still buying other games than Baldur's Gate 3 for $60 and will be buying other titles than Hollow Knight Silksong for $20. It's hard to realize the real tendencies behind the curtain of game industry. Most of these debates only happen in a couple of Twitter threads, but honestly, I don't think Silksong release changed the oldest rule in the book. Make a good game, market it well, and you'll get beautiful sale numbers. But I really can understand why more than 10 indie studios delayed their own releases, just to avoid competing with Silksong. That alone shows how monumental this game is. And remember, just like the first Hollow Knight, it was made by a handful of people, who somehow managed to grab the attention of the entire game industry. So it's in hype's nature to drag in people who don't fit to the party, and with Silksong, amount of people who doesn't really understand which party they were signing for is quite overwhelming. Party poopers simply overcrowded the room, which resulted in people whining that the main game actually demands player skill, endurance and patience. And the funniest part is, in the beginning of the game, when these people had problems with all that, Silksong doesn't really require you to overcome its challenges, it simply wants you to be curious. Red flowers, or at least I guess these are flowers, became the symbol of people's suffering. Because of the unusual trajectory of Hornet's pogo jump, they became an annoying obstacle for many players during the first hours of the game. They appear in a biome called Hunter's Marsh, which is one of the many locations open for you to discover at the beginning of the game, alongside more optional places, and the one that leads you to a necessary upgrade, without which you can't continue to the second act of the game. So where does Hunter's March leads us? Right, into nowhere. And you can understand it by simply opening the map. So what did players who stuck at this place? Right, they went on a freaking holy crusade. Dying, struggling with the platforming, cursing the balance, cursing the god, cursing developers, even cursing other people just for liking the game, blaming everything and everyone but themselves for the pain, ignoring the main rule of Lex Luthor.
Brain beats brawn!
So let's start with the basics. Red flowers are red. And what does life teach us about red? Yes, the red is for danger. Secondly, the biome is called Hunter's Marsh. And do you feel yourself at the beginning of the game in the role of Hunter? If you're dying over and over during the first hours of the game. Maybe you are a prey here and simply aren't ready to overcome this path, simply coming here too early. And lastly, if you experience such a high difficulty spike and you see that there are still many unexplored paths to choose from, maybe you'd better go another way around. Maybe the game tries to speak to you this way. This location teaches you the simple lesson: don't rush, play with a cool head. The whole first act is about the same thing, basically being its own game in miniature, which shows you that if you're stuck somewhere, almost always, there will be an opportunity for you to turn away, explore something somewhere else, and find a thing that will ease achieving your goal. But instead, many people trap themselves in a Dark Souls mindset. You know, the one where if you can't beat this one challenge, the story just stops. Silksong doesn't work like that. It clearly lets you know that A, this path goes nowhere, and B, there are still ton of other stuff to do on the map. It all ended with Team Cherry themselves giving an interview in which developers just confirmed what I was saying before.
Hornet is inherently faster and more skillful than the Knight, so even the base level enemy had to be more complicated, more intelligent. Silksong has some moments of steep difficulty. But part of allowing a higher level of freedom within the world means that you have choices all the time about where you're going and what you're doing. Players have ways to mitigate the difficulty via exploration, or learning, or even circumventing the challenge entirely, rather than getting stonewalled.
It's so humiliating by the audience to make game creators explain themselves. Like, imagine movie directors or musicians or writers literally spelling out what their work of art is about. I guess I can never recover from this. So yes, you can not only skip this challenging area, but also the whole boss fight with the Moving, who is also a big pain in the ass at the beginning of the game. Just collect 5 fleas for the flea caravan and they will scare away the annoying flying bug.
Brain beats roar!
Some will say I chickened out or even showed a lack of courage to face the game's challenge, but as I said before, the beginning of Hollow Knight Silksong doesn't test your skill as much as your curiosity and your desire to explore hidden ways to simplify your life. The whole first act teaches you the main rule of Metroidvania. No matter what, there will always be a reward for exploration of the game, and while Hollow Knight does borrow some core aspects of the Souls series, like cunning surprises for the player, Team Cherry's games are still much closer to Metroid and Castlevania. And you know, it's been a long time since I've had this much fun cheating a game, or more accurately, finding clever little ways to cheat in the game prepared for you by developers. Although these are completely different games, the emotions I felt during manipulations with the boxes in Deus Ex were quite similar to finding a hidden way to disarm a trap near the bench, or simply breaking a hidden wall that leads you to a new location. Such a big amount of hidden secrets, ways of breaking game sequences, really shows what Team Cherry has been working on for these years, and how far they advanced in game making, especially if you return to the very first Hollow Knight. You know, I don't really recommend you to play through the past installment in the series right before the release of the new one, because it's in the nature of the sequels, to basically repeat what you got in the previous title, which may tire you of the newest one, clouding your experience with negative emotions that game isn't even responsible for. This advice doubles when we speak about Metroidvanias, with their endless labyrinths of level design, which can make you insane as you progress further throughout the game. But as you remember, Silksong was initially developed as an expansion for Hollow Knight, before being taken into a full-fledged sequel. And I think that many of the problems people experience with Silksong are genealogically connected to its DLC origins, which are usually made for players anticipating new and more difficult challenges to overcome. So people who played Hollow Knight before or beat it right before Silksong release definitely had an advantage over tourists who started their journey into the bug world from the second game, which right from the start greeted them with double dodging enemies and optional hardcore platforming. And still, I don't want to make a smug joke out of myself saying that the game is easy and you don't understand anything. No, it's a difficult game by its design, but when Silksong becomes actually difficult, by that time you should already be skilled and experienced in its world. Every game puts you on the same dopamine roller coaster. You discover something new, you get better. It's kinda like being a kid. When you're growing so fast, you can't even sit still, because your body is overfilled with energy. Video games are giving us the similar experience, but downsizing years of childhood experience to mere hours of gameplay. Hollow Knight, as any other game, slowly evolves and expects players to adapt to the rising difficulty, taking its most challenging moments closer to the end, while most people who had problems with the game got broken by it right at the front gate. Yes, maybe some enemies have too much HP, because of which I was sometimes screaming, swearing and beating my table out of primal rage. But my main problem with Silksong lies in its charge system, which forces you to regularly grind ammo, especially annoying if you're stuck at some boss battle. It's a similar grind fest to Bloodborne, where blood vials farming was an integral and honestly stupid part of the game. I guess as here as in Bloodborne, the best solution for developers would have been to regenerate a bare minimum of your supply while resting, giving players an option, separating people who are willing to skip grind but face the challenge in rough attempts, and those who want to be more prepared before a hard fight. But I don't really see a few frustrating moments like this as the reason to hate the game by saying it isn't balanced or its creators didn't understand what they were doing. These difficulties perfectly fit into the game design, justifying every death by tying the player's struggle to the beauty of discovering new tools or amulets that can change the way you play. Some people argue that players with jobs and real life don't want to invest the effort required to play such a demanding game. On what I can only say that your personal life or your mood isn't the game's problem. Video games aren't obligated to deliver cheap fun. They obviously can do that, but this feature isn't cut in the stone. Video games are different, and that's why we love them. When I'm going to bed, I don't want to go through heavily narrated stories, though I like God of War or Red Dead Redemption 2. So instead, I'm just doing a couple of runs in roguelikes, like Dead Cells or Luck to be a Landlord. I can equally enjoy the relaxing pace of Animal Crossing, the brain-dead action of Samurai Warriors, and the challenge of Hollow Knight. When I have specific mood, I play specific games. And it isn't the game's fault that currently I'm struggling with it because I force myself to play it, without getting any enjoyment out of it. Silksong is difficult because developers choose to make it that way, and the only fair point to criticize such game design is lack of accessibility options for players who physically can't keep up with its rhythm. This is sacrifice made by developers in support of their creative vision, and it's their decision, which I wouldn't support nor criticize. But anyway, as usually, modders already did all the work. So in the end, this is mainly a question of perspective, and it's not about who's right or wrong, hardcore players or casual audience, but rather how you see obstacles in front of your path, as the challenge to adapt, whether you are doing it alone or with the thousands of players alongside, who literally fill social media with guides and tips about how to overcome difficulties in your way. Once again, creating a great community of people who, independently of their skill, all share the same feeling of perseverance and respect toward game rules, with the right of the game designer to set difficulty as he thinks it fits. Or rather, you see troubles in front of you as punishment for nothing, simply making your playthrough an inconvenient experience that only takes your time to take your time. And if that is your answer, then why are you playing video games at all? If you enjoyed this video so far, please like and subscribe.